Welcome to the Design Thinker podcast. You're listening to season 1, episode 8, hosted by me, Dani.
Me, Peter.
So what are we talking about today, Pete?
Today, Dani, we are exploring the question, what is the role of creativity in innovation and risk?
Whoa, that's a loaded question.
It seems like it. It's a big question, I think. So we usually start with definitions. Go
on. So maybe we need to start with defining what do we mean by creativity?
We did this a couple of episodes ago, and I still like that definition. And creativity, it's in a bit of a sandwich between imagination and innovation. Creativity is applied imagination. So imagination is when you picture it in your mind. Creativity is when you take that picture, that image, whatever it is that you have in your mind, and make it real in the world.
So I'm gonna make this a Googling moment today.
Okay, nice. Put the Google token in the Google machine.
According to Google, creativity is the use of imagination or original ideas to create something.
To create something. Okay, to make something. That's kind of what I said, isn't it? All right. Nice.
So okay. You and Google align.
Yeah, a part-time job if ever Google goes down.
You heard that, people. If Google goes down, you can just dial up Pete.
Yeah, I'll answer the questions.
Okay, so then, that was creativity. Then, what do we mean by innovation?
Well, innovation, let's start with at the same place with Sir Ken Robinson's nice definition. So you've got imagination, creativity, and then in it, so creativity is applied imagination. He describes innovation as being applied creativity. So it's taking the thing that you make and actually using it to make a difference in the world.
I like that. And I think this connects in nicely with what we talked about in episode 7 around form and function. So I think innovation has to have that applicability to it, which is form. I'm sorry, which is function.
Function. Yeah. So, so maybe creativity is similar to the art, and innovation is similar to design in that respect, I guess, going back to that episode. If you haven't listened to it, you need to go back and listen to that for that to make sense, everybody. It's worth listening to.
I thought so, Pete.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so I think in that episode we also talked about how it starts with imagination. Imagination leads to creativity. Creativity leads to innovation.
Yeah.
And we talked about how you can have creativity without innovation, but you can't have innovation without creativity.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
So keeping that in mind, what do we mean by risk?
Goodness, keeping that in mind, what do we mean by risk? This is going to be an interesting conversation, Dani, because as soon as you say the word risk, then it's almost as though the words innovation and creativity go out of my mind. So I'm hoping that's different by the end of this episode. What do we mean by risk? Well, risk risk for me, and I might have mentioned this on 1 or 2 episodes before. I used to do a lot of skydiving. I started jumping out of airplanes for fun when I was, I think, just turned 18, even though I was scared of heights.
To be young.
I know, and kept going until not too long ago. I did lots and lots of times. So risk, from that point of view, would be the risk of injury or fatality because of undertaking a potentially hazardous activity. So risk is the probability of undesirable outcomes. Yeah. So that.
So according to Google,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Risk is exposure to danger, harm, or loss. A situation involving exposure to danger, harm, or loss.
Situation. Well, again, I was kind of close. I mean, if Google was in the garage for repair, then my definition would be okay, wouldn't it? But Google says a situation involving exposure to
danger, harm, or loss.
Exposure to danger, harm, or loss. Okay. Okay, so when I was skydiving, definitely that was exposure to danger, harm, or loss for sure. But you know, I describe myself as a calculated risk taker. I always did my best to minimize that exposure to danger, harm, or loss. So we've got three definitions, and we're asking ourselves, what's the role of creativity in innovation and the role of creativity in risk?
So maybe we tackle the role of creativity and innovation.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the easier one.
Yes, it seems like it to me. If you want to start with the easy one, let's start there.
Yeah, that way our brains have a chance to warm up to some more. Okay.
I like your thinking.
Heavy duty thinking, you know. It's like the warm up set in exercise.
Okay. And also the listeners might stay with us a little bit longer as well. So let's get into this. Let's go.
Okay, so I think the role that creativity has, and if we go back to your definition, we can't have innovation without creativity. So we have to be able to engage in that creative thinking to be able to drive innovation forward. So I think that's the role. Like it's almost creativity is the precursor to innovation.
Yes, and it's one of the ingredients of innovation. Maybe even the vital ingredient of innovation. Because, I totally agree with it. I think it makes sense logically and also from experience. It's just not possible to be innovative without being creative, either first or simultaneously. So it's vital. Creativity is vital to innovation. I mean, that's a simple answer to what is the role of it. But is there anything else to that question?
So I have a question for you.
Yeah.
True or false? Mm-hmm. Everyone is creative.
True.
Why?
But everyone is creative, or everyone can be creative?
Let's go with everyone can be creative.
Well, definitely true. Everyone can be creative. It's absolutely true. Although I'm now thinking, maybe not everyone. You've made me really think there.
So what if I said this way? Everyone is creative in their own way.
Yeah. Okay. Yes, that's that helps me a lot. Because when I jumped in there with the absolute everybody, yes, without without question, and then paused, and I might thought, well, what about people who aren't able to who aren't able to make things, with their body, for example. Something just came out. So I'm kind of answering my own questions or my own arguments there. I'm going to use Stephen Hawking as an example. So Stephen Hawking, throughout his life, became less and less physically able, but was still continuously creative. Like he was still through modern technology able to take what he was imagining and make something. And that what he made was books, papers, lectures. He was a participant and I'm sure creative or had creative input into different films, videos, etc. Yeah, so in his own way, I mean, he was extremely creative, even though he had physical, quite extreme physical limitations.
And I think that's a really good example, Pete, because I think when we think about creativity, often we think about drawing and, it's all about the pixels and paint and, we picture artists. And while artists are very creative, they're not the only ones that are creative. So I think Stephen Hawking is a great example of that because he created very, beautiful things and very meaningful things as a creator.
And he, I think his branch of science, theoretical physics, everything starts with imagination, but in particular theoretical physics, as far as I understand, it starts with, grand, sometimes hypotheses, which emerge out of, physicists' imaginations. They're closing their eyes and imagining the vastness of the universe and the cosmos and the mysteries, and then starting to formulate a hypothesis, which they then go about, exploring using the scientific method. Einstein, another, scientist in a similar kind of field, whether it's true or not, he's supposedly described the way that he explored things. And what was it? Something about lying on his back in a field, looking up at or absorbing the rays of this. There was something about picturing himself being the rays of the sun traveling through time and space helped him start to crystallize the theory of relativity. Something along those lines. Just want again, people might not immediately think of scientists as being creative, but fundamentally, what we just described is hugely creative.
But I think, the scientific process, while it is rigorous and very methodical, it is about, the way we find things out in science is, we experiment. But to be able to experiment, you have to have some imagination and some creativity, because if you don't, then you're just continuing to exist in what already is here. And the whole process, the whole reason we engage in the scientific method is to find out new things.
Yeah. Yes. What was the question again? Can anybody be creative, or is it and
everyone is creative? Everyone's creative. Yeah.
In their own way, and I think So, Stephen Hawking, good example of in their own way, despite limitations which he overcame. I'm trying to think of any other kind of extremes on either end of the spectrum that might prove or disprove. we don't have time to apply the scientific method to that question.
Future episode.
Future episode or future season. What future different podcasts? What about you, Dani? What do you think? What's your answer to your own question? What's your thoughts?
I fundamentally believe that all humans are creative. If you study human history, I think the very reason that, you and I are here today is because of both human creativity and innovation. At some point, our ancestors were, had to figure out, hey, that animal looks pretty warm. And had to figure out, well, if we take their skin and put it on ourselves, we'll be warm too. So I think our whole existence has examples of things that we have created: the wheel, the fire, sanitation. At some point, someone discovered that if I wash my hands more, I won't get sick as much. And these things, when we look back on it, it almost seems silly because it's such common knowledge today, but somebody had to have the curiosity to be able to think of those ideas. So I think one of the biggest myths that we've been telling ourselves is that, I think a lot of people tell themselves they're not creative because they can't paint or draw. Yeah. And I think we stop encouraging creativity in people that maybe can't paint or draw. But creativity is much broader than that. And I believe that part of the human experience is our ability to be creative.
Nice. And I agree. This is definitely another episode or just not conversation, but might be worth exploring really briefly. I don't know if you've got any thoughts on this. Is life itself creative?
Absolutely. We have a lot of metaphors that speak to that, like we talk about starting a new chapter or turning the page, like, starting with a blank slate. The world is your oyster. Those are all metaphors that resemble that life is what we create it to be.
So you mean our life? I was actually meaning the broader life on planet Earth. Is it inherently creative? Is life itself inherently creative?
Ooh. So I think on a more tangible level, the life we create for ourselves is an act of creativity.
Okay, let's stick with that actually.
I think the question you're asking, that's really deep.
I thought it might be too deep. We'll come back to that sometime.
Yeah.
Back to that. But coming back to actually your more helpful, relevant perspective that the life we make is as a result of creativity. I think it is more or less what you said. Yeah. So coming back to the belief that we share that everybody is creative, like day to day, every single person on this planet is creating something all the time. Creating, creating, if we go down to Maslow's hierarchy, or did I hear describe it as sometimes better imagined as a boat. That'll come back to me and I'll mention it before the episode finishes. Scott Barry Kaufman, he describes Maslow's hierarchy better as a boat because it helps us sail the seas of life. But if we think about it, so I guess, if we are down at the bottom or in the hull of that boat, creating the fundamentals required for our survival, or looking for the fundamentals like shelter, etc., that we need to actually physically create something to keep us warm, to keep us dry, to eat something, and then it's all the way to the top of the it's a yacht, the top of the mast, or the sail that keeps, the self-actualization, that's ultimate creativity, and when we're at that level, isn't it? He says, pausing to think and imagine and create some words. What do you think, Maslow? Creativity?
As you were talking about that, what's been coming up for me is this idea of, I think at every level, there's a different, our capacity, or I guess at every level, our creativity game is different, right? So if you're at that foundational level of where you're worried about food and shelter, you're applying creativity in a very different way. And the image that it brought back to me was like in my university days, and I'm trying to feed myself on a budget. Mm-hmm. And you're quite creative in what you're eating and how you're eating. Mm-hmm. And the stage of life I am at now, I don't have those same, I'm no longer trying to, feed myself on a shoestring budget. Although, grocery bills are going up these days, so I might need to revert back to that. Yeah. But I'm facing other challenges, so I'm applying my creativity in other ways. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of solidifying for me, like creativity is something that we have, and it goes with us to where we go in life, right? And like if you take it back to, yourself as a 3-year-old, with your crayons and blocks and stuff, like you are applying creativity in a different way. So that's kind of, so I think if you think about Maslow's hierarchy, like I think creativity shows up at every level, but differently.
Yeah, nice. A quick question, super quick question, then I think I've got a nice segue into something. What was your go-to shoestring budget meal?
Mine was, I don't know if it's sold in New Zealand, but in the US we have these things called ramen noodles. Yep. And you can get like back then you could get like a whole 10 pack of them for like $1. Wow. So I used to get that, and I used to get eggs and frozen vegetables. Mm-hmm.
Mix it all together.
It's like a one-pot meal.
A one-pot meal. Lovely. Delicious and nutritious. I didn't grow up in New Zealand, but I believe, so I wasn't a student in New Zealand, but I believe there is something very similar to the ramen noodles in New Zealand. My go-to was a baked bean omelette. So I'd take 2 eggs, make an omelette, and then a tin of beans in the omelette, fold it over. Delicious.
That actually sounds really good.
It was good occasionally, but when it turned into a weekly meal, it was. And here, double segue coming up. I did that so I could save money, so that I had money to get myself to the skydiving centre at weekends and be able to jump out of airplanes. Talking of which, that risky activity. So when we're talking here about Maslow's hierarchy and needing to find food, shelter, heat, etc., is there something in that about we are, maybe this is where risk and creativity come together, because down at that bottom there, well, at every level maybe of the hierarchy, there's a risk of something, a risk of harm to something. Down at the bottom, it's a risk of harm to our physical existence, almost right at the fundamentals. And then maybe as we go up the hierarchy, there's risk of harm to other aspects of ourselves, whether it's our psyche, etc., etc. So maybe this is where risk and creativity come together in one way.
Yeah, so let's unpack risk a little bit because I do
Yeah.
think there's a strong interplay between risk, innovation, and creativity. So what do we think the role of risk is? If we flip our question, what's the role of risk in creativity and innovation?
Okay. So what's the role of risk in innovation and creativity? What's immediately springing to mind? It's like a counterbalance. Let's see, a risk, according to Google, is a situation involving exposure to danger, harm, or loss. Well, again, it's a bit like your answer to the Maslow thing. It's depends what we're creating or innovating. What could we imagine? Let's kind of make this a little bit more concrete. What could we say that we're creating to begin with, and then innovating second?
So let's go with something like let's say we are designing a car that doesn't require petrol.
Yeah.
We're going to design a green car. Green as in energy, not the color.
Okay. Okay, so we're designing a green energy motor vehicle. What part does risk play when it comes to creating?
Well, let's kind of walk through the whole thing, right? So
yeah.
The imaginative part in this is even being able to conceive that we can have a car that doesn't require petrol.
Mm-hmm.
So if that's the imaginative part, then what's the creative part? Then how does that imagined idea come to creativity?
Well, I guess one way that would happen is you start to explore ways that you could create energy without using petrol. So you could start experimenting with different materials, different methods of propulsion.
So the creativity is the ideation of how might we do this?
The ideation, and then maybe in design terms, starting to build prototypes of things and testing them out. That for me, or in this situation, that you could term that as the creativity. And then stepping forward into the innovation. The innovation is when you start to discover enough through that creative ideation and prototyping to realize that whatever that maybe some of your prototyping results in something that is actually does work and will move in this case a vehicle forwards without using petrol for its or fossil fuels for its fuel.
I agree with you, except in my mind, the innovation comes in when we've actually created the version 1 of the car.
Okay.
For me, that's the innovation, because remember, innovation is creativity applied.
Yeah. So when the car is actually usable as a car, that's when we're innovating. because you defined this as we're going to not designing an engine, but designing a car. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Okay. So now we've kind of walked through imagination, creativity, innovation.
Yeah.
So now we've got our version 1 of our green energy car.
Yeah.
Where does risk sit in all of that?
Well, there's the risk of, I guess there's lots of different risks. There's risk of at the imagination stage. There's the risk of it's a loss risk there where if you don't, maybe it's there's always a risk of not moving forward to the next stage. So there's a risk of imagining something but not creating it, and the loss there is if you imagine something that could have been the solution, but you don't make a creation, you don't create what was in your imagination, then you've lost the opportunity. And likewise, that same risk exists moving from creativity to innovation. Likewise, the opposite risk is true, that there's a risk of imagining lots of things, creating lots of things, either innovating lots of things or innovating the wrong thing. And that thing, in this case, maybe what ends up in the car is something that's harmful, unintentionally harmful, maybe even more harmful to the environment than the fossil fuels that we're trying to replace in the first place were. Yeah, there's a couple of things there. Risk. I've never thought about it in that way before. Maybe there's a risk both of doing something and of not doing something at each stage between those three modes.
Mm-hmm. I think you've hit on something really important. So I think there's two sides to risk, right? There's a risk of doing something new.
Yeah.
And then there's a risk of not doing something new.
Yeah.
In my experience, I think we seem to be hyper focused on the risk of doing something, and we almost ignore the risk of not doing it. What are your thoughts?
Yes, I definitely agree with that. I think, and I wonder whether that's it seemed that bias of towards the risk of doing something versus the weighing up the risk of not doing something, that seems to be far more common than the other way around. Mm-hmm. And coming back to my own personal example of skydiving, that's probably why there isn't a queue to get to a skydiving center every weekend. That's not many people choose to do it, because not many people, more people believe the risk of jumping out of an airplane, perfectly safe airplane with a parachute on their back. More people see that as a risk not worth taking than I've got this right around. More people see that as a risk not worth taking than people who see it as a risk worth taking. Mm-hmm. I was one of the people that I took the initial risk and carried on taking the risk because the reward for that, taking that risk, outweighed what I perceived as the exposure to danger, harm, and loss. Versus it would be the opposite way around. So I think that's what you're saying, isn't it? So
that is what I'm saying. So I guess since you're in the minority in this case, I'm curious.
Yeah.
Like, what enabled you to see it differently?
What enabled me to see it differently? Um, I'm trying to think back to the first time that I did it. Maybe I'll have to wind myself back through time. Later on, and I did nearly 2,000 skydives during the time that I have skydived so far. I don't do it at the moment. I might go back to it, but later on in that time period, the and there is some kind of what's called risk. I think it's homeostasis, where you just kind of get used to a particular level of potential danger, harm, and loss. But later on in there, I was, doing competitive formation skydiving, and the greater risk to me wasn't dying, as most people would expect, but it was not performing, or the team I was part of not performing to our peak ability. So that was the greater risk in my mind, and the one that we trained for, because I guess it's similar to Maslow. We'd kind of, by that point, we were experienced. We'd kind of trained in the basic survival methods and mechanisms, and we were moving up the Maslow's hierarchy. Right, the very first time. Well, actually, maybe this is going to paint a picture. The second time I jumped out of an airplane was still the most frightening thing I've ever done in my life. Not the first one, but the second one, because the first one I didn't know what was coming. The second one I did, and I was like 100 times more fearful that sitting on the door of the airplane than I had been the first time. What led me to feel able to confident enough that to do the first one, I think it was lots to do with environment. So there was what I perceived to be a very safe environment. There was some role modeling. By that time, I'd met quite a few people who'd done a lot more than one parachute jump, and obviously they were all still alive, and they were also able to tell me amazing stories that here we go, kind of looping back to, that sparked my imagination. And the way that they told the stories of maybe their first or second or 10th or 100th or 2000th time they jumped out of an airplane, what they were doing, and the way they told those stories really painted a picture of what I could expect if I took that risk myself. So imagination, environment, role modeling, and it all weighed up to make the risk worth taking. And what was this story about? How did we get onto this? It was exploring, this concept of the risk of not doing something. Yeah, so I suppose, maybe that answers the question for the first jump. The second jump, and then the next, I don't know, 20 or 25, where I persevered despite the fear centers of my brain doing their best to incapacitate me whilst I was sitting on the edge of an airplane at 2,000 feet. It's not that helpful, being out of control of your body at that point in time. And that maybe flips into the question you're asking, which is with the risk of not doing something. By that point, I guess I'd set myself a goal or an objective, and I'd seen other people doing what I wanted to do. So there was therefore the risk of not doing it was too great for me. The reward that I'd seen meant that I was willing to take that risk. So it's something to the loss aversion. I'm sure there's heaps of stuff in here from system 1 and system 2. And biases.
So I think from a bias perspective, as humans, we are much more loss averse than like the pain we feel from loss is something like twice as great as the joy we feel from a gain. So we're much more fearful of losing something than gaining something.
Yeah, okay.
So that kind of helps to explain why our risk focus tends to be on minimizing loss than maximizing gain, right?
Yeah, okay. Nice.
So that's like the behavioral science explanation of this. So let's kind of take this, because I think in your work and in my work, we always come to this situation in organizations. Most organizations that we work for or work with, they bring us in because they want to innovate.
Yes. Yeah. There's a desire to innovate. Yeah.
Yeah. And then something happens.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There's the desire to innovate. There's some investment in to move innovation forward, and then it becomes like a slow, painful crawl.
Yes, it can turn into that, and can happen like that.
And I'm generalizing here. So,
Yeah.
these are experiences that Pete and I have had across, well, I guess throughout our careers.
Yeah, that's right. Definitely through our careers. And I think for me, because it's happened, and there's stories abound, it seems to be something to do with, I don't know if the human condition is too kind of heavy or grand, but it's definitely something to do with organizations beyond a certain size and, environments, systems, etc. that it's, despite the high desire to innovate, it's often, that desire is often quashed or thwarted by the perception of risk. And having this conversation and framing it in terms of imagination, creativity, and innovation. Yeah, we tend to get stuck in the that minimizing loss kind of frame rather than the maximizing gain. So sometimes things don't even get to the innovation stage.
So I think our experience, well, I won't speak for you, but my experience has been that risk often tends to be the squasher of innovation and creativity. I'm assuming that your head nodding for our listeners that can't see means right. you agree. So if we were to reframe that, so that's the role that's traditionally played. What role can risk play in innovation? Like, can risk and innovation play together in a way that enables us to balance, where risk plays the role of we're not going to fall off the cliff, and innovation plays the role of we're not going to go stale and die?
Yes, I think it can, and maybe to play around with your metaphor and extend it slightly, risk can play the role of being the massive big crash mat at the bottom of the cliff, and innovation can be the flying machine that you jump off the cliff attached to. I'm starting to that this idea of risk. So risk providing the kind of safety net, if you like, but maybe also helping risk be a reframing device, or maybe reframing risk from that loss minimization bias, and maybe not replacing it entirely, but complementing it with the risk of the risk of not maximizing the gain. I've mangled the words and the logic about it there. I think, but maybe you can simplify it. But you know what I mean? Like having often, or in my experience, that this focus is almost entirely on minimizing the loss, versus there's almost never any discussion, perception, never mind measurement of maximizing the gain.
Yeah, I mean, I've never heard a conversation about risk which was about maximizing the gain. Every risk conversation that I've ever been a part of has been about minimizing loss. So I guess that brings up another question. Can we truly be innovative and innovate if our focus is on minimizing loss?
That's a good question. Listeners can't see me thinking hard about that one. I'm going to go with my intuition says no. If you're always focused on you know, what could go wrong, then almost by definition, you know, you're using up a lot of your either individual or hopefully collective brain power on that, rather than, I know I'm oversimplifying, but what could go right. I think it's as a person thinks, so they are. So, you know, if we're always thinking about what could go wrong, then we'll really struggle to see what could go right. Again, I'm oversimplifying, but we struggle to see what could go right. And again, much like, you know, I think we've, you know, I've come back to this a couple of times in other episodes, but it's about balance, isn't it? I guess what I'm not saying, and I have to probably overstate this because people listening to this go, there's this skydiving guy, he's just a crazy adrenaline junkie. Of course he's gonna say risk, whatever. But like I said, I am a calculated risk taker, and maybe it's about the balance. It's the balance. In this case, I think the balance of the two, and bringing it back to imagination, creativity, and innovation. Maybe it starts in imagination, isn't it? Maybe the start of, you know, any kind of risk assessment of a creative act or an innovation should or might include imagining all the things that might go wrong. Yep, that's a good thing to do, keep us safe, but also let's spend the same amount, if not more time, imagining all the things that could go right, or all the ways that things could be even better if they do go right, and then balance things up that way.
Yeah, I think when it comes to creativity, innovation, and risk, I think it is about balance. Like those three things need to play nicely together in a very balanced way, right? Because I think completely unleashing innovation and anything goes is probably not going to be effective either. The same way I think diving into, you know, our focus is minimizing loss from a risk perspective, that's not going to work either. Yeah. So it's kind of this ability to balance the three. And I think also recognizing that they're both equally important. Like if you don't innovate, you're going to go stale, and it won't matter. Like if you don't innovate, you're probably going to end up losing anyway. But if you're not applying some level of loss aversion to your innovation, then your losses are going to probably be great as well. Yeah. So I think there's this balance to play, and I don't think that anybody has figured it out right.
No.
And then, you know, it's not only doing that, especially when we're talking about organizations, it's not just doing that once, right? It's how do we sustain that balance over and over and over and over again over time? And that's a real, I mean, that's literally, to me, like, that's like juggling 24 hours a day.
Yeah, yeah. Yes. Yeah, all the time, like consistently. It makes me think of there's trees. I can see trees. That makes me think of a tree. It's like constantly growing in different ways, probing into the ground with its roots to find, the right nutrients. The leaves are doing the same thing. It's like just continually kind of evolving. It's still a tree, but it's continually evolving in lots of, noticeable and imperceptible ways. I think my brain is kind of tuned into metaphors that involve nature at the moment. And what you described there maybe is a reason that is helpful. And this is another episode. I think we've said that a few times this time. Like organizations thinking of them more as organisms than as machines, and that they're and I think that's a view that's becoming more and more common, is that organizations that are people, therefore we should be it's more helpful to think of them, view them and treat them like organisms rather than mechanistic machines, because what you just described, the ability to continually adapt and evolve just like a tree does to its changing environment, is far better done by an organism than a machine. Do you think we've just answered our own "what does it all mean" question again before we asked it? Hey, we're getting quite good at this, aren't we? So,
I think we have, like, I think what it all means is, so we started out with the question, looking at risk, creativity, innovation. What role does risk play in innovation and creativity? We dissected each of those terms, talked about what it is, and then we talked about how do they play together. And I think what we've arrived at is this idea that it's a balancing act, and it's a balance, it's a longevity act as well. Like it's the ability to sustain balance over time.
Nice. The ability to sustain balance over time. You've just given you my takeaway. I'm going to take that, the ability to sustain balance over time. Thanks. What about yours? What's your takeaway?
I think, this quote came to mind, and I'm trying to remember where it came from. And it's the, but what if I fail? And then the responding quote is, my darling, but what if you succeed?
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to remember where that's from. And that's kind of, I think for me, my takeaway is, when I get into those moments where I'm feeling like I want to be risk averse, just remembering that there's an equal chance the opposite can happen as well.
That's nice. I'm looking up, I'm using one of my Google tokens just to look up that quote, because I think it's nice to attribute.
While you're doing that, have you found it out yet?
While you're doing that, keep going.
Well, I just want, I think as we're wrapping up this episode, I think I just wanted to touch on, why this is so important, this whole interplay between creativity, innovation, and risk. And I think, at least in my work, what I've come to is that, as individuals, as organizations, as communities, we're all facing very tough challenges, or what we might call wicked problems. And we have to learn how to engage in this balancing act, because we need innovation, and we need to know how to balance risk in a healthy way. And, and it's kind of like a chicken and egg thing, because you can't have innovation if you don't have a healthy risk appetite. So I think I just wanted to highlight the importance of like what's at stake here if we don't learn how to balance those two.
Nice. Nice note to finish on, Dani. I agree. It's critically important. The quote, "What if I fail? Oh, but my darling, what if you fly?" comes from, apparently, is attributed to someone called Aaron Hansen. And Aaron Hansen is the creator of the contemporary painting style Open Impressionism. She has a website at aaronhansen.com.
That will be my other takeaway.
Mine too. 2 takeaways for the price of one today. We took a risk, and that's what we got.
I think that's it for us on this episode, Pete. Thanks everyone for listening, and tune in next week for our final episode of season 1. Bye everyone.
Bye everyone. See you then.